My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Now, although I consider myself a fairly young priest, sometimes I forget how much of a generation gap there is between myself and the current students that I help in my work. A lot of them are in high school. And I'm quickly reminded of that gap whenever they use words or slang that I don't recognize, that go right over my head. I had one of those embarrassing moments about a year ago when I was staffing a summer camp for boys out in the hill country of Pennsylvania. It was a beautiful campus with a big lake. It was really with cabins and a mess hall, any young boy's dream. And of course, lots of sports. And so as the camp chaplain, I would often make the rounds of the place while the boys competed in sports competitions. And many of the kids would take advantage while on the sidelines to talk with me or even to go to confession. Well, while watching a game of lively basketball, I was chatting with one of the boys on the sidelines, casually observing the play. Well, one of the players, probably around 12 years old, scored a great three-pointer. And as he ran down the court after his shot, he celebrated by pumping his chest and yelling, "I am the GOAT!" Now, I looked around at this point to see whether I was the only one who was perplexed. Did he just call himself a goat? How is that positive? Is he okay? And so this kid who was talking to me took pity on me, probably thinking, this poor older priest. And he said, "Father, when he says the GOAT, he means he's the greatest of all time. GOAT. Well, you learn something new every day. Apparently, the GOAT is a pretty common expression in our culture, especially when referring to sports. So commentators will debate whether Michael Jordan or LeBron James is the GOAT of basketball, the greatest of all time. Or who is the GOAT of football quarterbacks. Or sometimes it's referred to pop singers. Oh, she is definitely the GOAT, right? The greatest of all time when it comes to singers. And in a way, all of us aspire to greatness. That kid on the basketball court was celebrating his own success, perhaps a bit exaggerated. I mean, come on, the greatest of all time. And yet, we all have this desire to be great, to be the best. But Lord, so often our vision of greatness is backwards, isn't it? We think that the GOAT is the wealthiest, the prettiest, the smartest. And isn't it true, Lord, that our culture tends to gravitate around personality cults? A pop star like Beyoncé apparently has roughly 128 million followers on Instagram. Or Lionel Messi, that legendary soccer player, he has 118 million followers. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of adoration for the GOAT. And so we may think that to be great, I need to make more money, I need to play better basketball, I need to improve my physique, or have more followers on Instagram. And we can even become anxious about it, right? Comparing ourselves with others. How do I measure up? And we can sense this kind of one-upmanship in the Gospels. This comparing, this jabbing for power among the apostles. So often the Gospels describe in passing these episodes of bickering about who is the greatest. And this is the case with today's Gospel. An argument arose between them about which of them was the greatest. Jesus knew what thoughts were going through their mind. This is what we read in the Gospel of Luke. And at first glance, we might have a kind of caricature of this scene in our head. an argument arose between them about which of them was the greatest. We might think that the apostles were literally shouting at each other, "I'm the goat." No, "I'm the goat." But it's more likely that the tension between them was more subtle. This is perhaps why St. Luke clarifies when he says that Jesus knew their thoughts. He could read their hearts and sense the envy running in their veins, even though perhaps they weren't saying that much. Perhaps they were comparing in their minds who was getting better treatment from the Master, or who had performed more miracles in the Master's name, who was getting more likes from the crowds. But Jesus, you totally turned the situation around. Knowing that your disciples were obsessed over their own greatness, you do something totally unexpected. The Gospel reads, "He took a little child and set him by his side, and then said to them, 'Anyone who welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For the least among you all, that is the one who is great.'" Now we can imagine the silence that this gesture would have caused among the bickering apostles. And Lord, don't you often do that? You make these surprising moves. In this case, he presents to the apostles the least powerful, the least important, the least valued member of society, right? A child in ancient times had hardly any rights or privileges. And he says, pointing to the child, "The least among you is truly the greatest." Lord, you turn our notions on their head. You radically invert the values of this world. It's like you take our perception of reality and you twist it inside out like a sock. You totally turn us around. And this isn't the only time that you make a teaching moment out of the apostles' arguments over who is the greatest. We can think, for example, of the Last Supper, where unfortunately the apostles fall into bickering again about who is the greatest among them. And so Jesus, knowing what's going on in their heads, he gets up, he puts an apron around himself, and he gets down on his hands and knees and he washes their smelly, grimy feet. Jesus wants to show us with his deeds, with his own life, that the greatest among us is the one who serves. I remember hearing a story shortly after Pope Francis was elected, the Holy Father, of a moment he had with one of the Swiss guards in the papal palace. You know, the Swiss guards guard the Pope, and so one of these guards was waiting outside the bedroom of Pope Francis, standing there in the hallway. And so when the Pope came by, he saw the young man, and he said, "You look tired, and you look hungry." And of course, the poor kid didn't know how to respond, and so he sort of just stood there in silence, not expecting this gesture of the Pope. And so the Pope went into his room, but then he came out a few seconds later with a jelly sandwich from his small fridge. A jelly sandwich that he had there. And he held it out for the Swiss guard to eat. Now, it was a very awkward moment. The Swiss guard didn't really know how to react. And so he started to try to eat this sandwich while still holding his battle axe. And so the Pope said, "Why don't you sit down?" And the soldier said, "I can't. I have orders to stand." And so then the Pope said, "Well, who's your boss? I'm your boss. I command you to sit down and eat this sandwich and enjoy it." It's a beautiful image, right? Of whoever is the least among you is the greatest. Even though the Pope, you could say, is the goat of the Catholic Church, right? The most powerful figure in the Catholic Church, he makes this gesture of service towards this Swiss guard, just as Jesus got on his hands and knees to wash the feet of the apostles. They're trying to tell us something, Lord. How often do I allow myself to fall into the delusion of thinking that in order to be great, I need to be the best. I need to receive the esteem and praise of other people, or I need to somehow accumulate lots of fame and fortune. Why do I obsess so much over my reputation, Lord? Why am I so concerned about being the goat? You want to tell us something else, Lord. To be truly great, we ought to be saints, and the saint is the one who serves. St. Josemaria gave a very simple rule of thumb for how to achieve true greatness. He called it self-forgetfulness. Give yourself in service to others to such a degree that you forget yourself in love, that you lose track of your own needs and concerns, the worry of reputation, or how you're coming off to others, because you're genuinely and exclusively concerned with the people around you. This is a big challenge, but we have a wonderful example in the saints, the true goats of the world, and first and foremost, in our Lord, who gives himself completely to us in love. And so we can finish by asking, who is the true goat, the truly greatest of all time? Jesus Christ. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask your help in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.